Hi, good morning, everybody. Tom Seiler with another podcast here for Life, the Universe, and Bowling. And the topic that came up on the internet this week because of a USBC survey, should we ban urethane bowling balls? I'm going to weigh in a little bit. I'll try to keep this video pretty brief, even though I'm in the middle of a 4.5 hour drive this morning. My personal opinion, no. Right? And here's why. The only people complaining about urethane are people who don't benefit from urethane use. Typically speaking, those are going to be the lower rev players in a competition. Now, when I say lower rev players in competition, if you're in league, you might be a lower rev player if you're a 250 RPM guy. If you're in the PBA, you might be a quote-unquote lower rev player if you're a 450 RPM guy. The high RPM guys, high power players, let's stop using RPM and start using power, because there's a lot of tilt and axis rotation and track diameter or track circumference, stuff like that comes into play. But let's say the high power player's advantage for using urethane comes from controlling the lane. The low power player complains because that changes the playing field, and they feel it changes it negatively against them. So when we talk about high and low power player, let's break that down maybe even a little bit further. Back when I started bowling PBA events in the 90s and early 2000s, there were certain patterns that were very definitely advantageous to be right-handed. Those were patterns that were a little bit hard on the fresh, but as they broke down and as some friction got created, they got easier, right? Since everybody's throwing reactive balls, everybody's vacuuming oil off of the lanes, the righties would all throw dull stuff, burn up the track as fast as they could, move 3 or 4 boards left, and absolutely murder them. And the lefties didn't have enough traffic on their side to burn that hole in the pattern, so they had to deal with the tighter, harder condition all day long. And they felt that it wasn't fair because at the end of the day there were no lefties in the top of the score sheet. When you look at high and low power players, I feel like we're seeing the exact same thing with urethane in reverse. The lower power players tend to favor cleaner conditions. More skid in the front, more hook in the back end. The higher power players tend to be able to navigate more hook in the front, more skid in the back end, because they can create angle even though there's oil down lane in transition. So the high power players like urethane. They like to stretch the pattern. That's advantageous for them. That makes other players in the competition not as effective. It makes them still reasonably as effective, right? It doesn't affect them as much as it does the low power players. So the low power players complain about it. Just like the lefties complained about the right-handers being able to burn a hole in all the patterns the PBA was using 25 years ago. It's the same argument, it's just in reverse. It's pushing oil or moving oil to the back of the lane instead of evacuating oil from the front of the lane. So I read a post this morning from Walter Ray Williams Jr., greatest of all time. You can say what you want about Walter Ray. The guy threw strikes for 30 years straight, right? He was competitive to almost 60 years old. He didn't hook it a lot, but he found a way to win when the power players were winning. He found a way to absolutely dominate when the straighter players were dominating. Walter Ray posted against banning urethane. And here's what he said, paraphrasing, I'm going from memory, but basically Walter Ray said, this isn't going to fix the problem. All bowling balls are made of urethane. we had a way of testing the hardness, which was the real problem with the Purple Hammer, let's be real, and the Pitch Black, was that they were getting softer over time. And that softness was creating a bigger contact patch. A bigger contact patch was exacerbating the carry down problem because those balls didn't flare, etc., etc., etc. Basically, he's saying, how do you determine what is urethane? Because reactive resin balls are urethane. They're just a different blend of urethane, etc. So, where do we go from here? The interesting thing about this is the PBA chose a couple years ago to do the 78 hardness rule. I owned a Purple Hammer before that, but I only drilled it to test it against other balls, and I really wasn't that interested in throwing it. The Purple Hammer over the last 3 or 4 years has become one of my favorite bowling balls. I am one of the very few bowlers, I would imagine, that actually own a durometer, and I have paid close attention to my Purple Hammer over the years. I've had it, like I said, probably 3 years. My Purple Hammer punches about 66. That's way below 73. It's punched way below 73 for a very long time. I test it every few months just to see if it's changing. I have a theory on why it's changing, but we'll get to that later. So I was reluctant to drill one of the new Black Hammer 78s because I had being a on and off storm guy, I had IQ 78s, and those rolled okay for me, but they weren't the cat's meow. I liked them because they flared and they didn't stretch the pattern as much, if at all. They didn't pick up oil from the front of the lane, so I felt that the IQ 78 was a more fair bowling ball to throw in competition because it didn't alter the playing surface for the other players. There are people that'll argue that, and sure, you could drill an IQ 78 with a low flare layout and it'll modify the pattern just as much as the Purple Hammer. But let's be real, people don't do that. So anyway, finally about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I drilled a Black Hammer because I went to a regional tournament. Everybody was throwing urethane, even in the seniors, even with low rev rates, even on a 42-foot pattern, blah, blah, blah. Let's cut to the chase. Yes, there are times you have to throw urethane to be competitive at that level. Have to. No options. I had a couple storm levels. I did not have a good look with the storm level. I went 170 out of the gate, missed a cut by 19 pins. Because my look those first 2 games, when everybody in the building was throwing urethane in front of me, was pretty bad. You can't outbowl a bad ball reaction. So I came home frustrated. Yeah, it's a 5-hour drive. I had a great tournament other than those first 2 games. I came home and I finally drilled the Black Hammer urethane 78 that had been sitting next to my drill press for, 6 months. And I put a durometer on it and it measured right at 78. Shocker. Just like my IQ 78s did. So I put holes in it. To me, the 78 hardness rule meant that I needed to surface it at 360 instead of 500. End of story. My Black Hammer at 360 rolled very, very, very similarly to my Purple at 500. So it wasn't a life-changing alteration for me. It was just drop a pad and you have the same look. So out of curiosity, after throwing, 20, 30, 40 games with that Black Hammer, I got the durometer out. Guess what it punched? 73. So it's now a Purple Hammer. A new Purple Hammer out of the box. Threw another 20, 30, 40 games on it. Guess what it punched? 71. Now it's below the 73 hardness standard. Wonder where it's gonna bottom out. I don't know. The last time I punched it, it was between 70-ish on one side of the ball, 71 on the other side of the ball. My personal feeling is that there's really only 2 things that can be causing that urethane to soften up. One of them is mechanical use. Mechanical use would be microscopic heat generated between the ball and the lane, drier parts of the lane when it encounters friction, blah, 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 blah. I don't think that's it. What I do think is it is I think some of the lane oils and the chemistry of the lane oils is solvent based, because there's a lot of stuff that's put in modern lane oils to make those suspended solids and the different types of synthetic oil that they use to create those. There's a lot of solvents that are used in those to keep them in liquid form while they're put on the lane, okay? So my personal opinion is that the actual softness problem is being created by the chemistry between the bowling ball cover and the lane oil. Because what else could it be, right? So certain balls soften up, certain balls don't. I'm digressing a little bit, but I guess what I'm getting to is the PBA and USBC put out a fix for this problem a couple of years ago. It's not a fix. I bowl PBA events. I throw the black hammer now because I'm required to. I can't throw my purple. But I gotta tell you, that black hammer hooks every bit as much as the purple does, especially as it's getting more games on it. And they didn't fix the problem. They didn't even close to fix the problem. Years ago, as Walter Ray alluded to, we used to have a check-in or a tech inspection for all of our bowling balls. They checked the diameter, they weighed the statics, they drilled a little mill hole above the finger holes, and they punched it with a durometer both on the surface of the ball and under the surface of the ball. And the reason they used to do that was to try to catch the guys that were soaking stuff in ketone, right? Well, the boogeyman is no longer ketone. The boogeyman might be the lane oil. I don't know. I'm going to do an experiment. Doing an experiment right now. I have a brand new hammer black urethane that's sitting in a bath of lane oil right now back at my place. It's been in it for a week. I'm going to leave it in it for a couple more weeks without ever putting holes in it, without ever throwing it down the lane, without ever having encountered mechanical stresses of bowling. I'm going to see if one side of this ball punches on the durometer a little bit softer than the other side of this ball after being bathed in lane oil. I'm not a betting man, but I'm going to guess that there's a high likelihood that it does. So that's one attempt that the USBC and PBA made to control urethane. It didn't work. Urethane use didn't slow down. If anything, it became more pervasive. We just had Junior Gold a week ago. That was one of the biggest purple hammer fests on the planet. Second only to some of the European championships, etc., where you look at those ball returns and they're all purple, all across the lane bed, every day, all day, on the fresh, on the long patterns, it doesn't matter. So where are we with this? Obviously, there are some powers inside the USBC and PBA that feel, for whatever reason, that urethane is not in the best interest of the sport. Otherwise, this would not be a discussion. We all know that creating a poll on SurveyMonkey is not going to give any result other than PBA plus USBC plus SurveyMonkey plus urethane equals bad. I would imagine that the survey results are going to be in the 60 to 70% range against urethane, 15 to 20% pro urethane, 15 to 20% I don't care, right? So what's USBC going to do with that information when it inevitably comes around? Are they going to ban urethane completely? I know there's one ball manufacturer, and there are factories in Mexico that's not going to be thrilled about that. They've had a huge competitive advantage in that landscape for a long time. Sorry, Storm, your urethane balls aren't as good as theirs. I like Motive lately, been throwing a lot of Motive. Sorry, Motive, your urethane balls aren't even urethane. And they don't roll like a purple hammer, or a black hammer, or a pitch black for that matter. I think we're going to see a lot of damage done to the game of bowling just by having this debate, because it's being had in the bowling center between friends, between acquaintances, between teammates. I would love to have thrown urethane at the USBC tournament this year, but I didn't want to be tarred and feathered and crucified by my teammates for even taking one to Baton Rouge, so I didn't. I think this debate is going to drive even more people out of the sport of bowling. I think it's terrible for the sport of bowling. And I think we need to figure out what the hell we're doing, whether we're controlling lane oil volume, whether we're controlling surface friction, whether we're controlling patterns that are intentionally too hard, because everybody hates patterns that are intentionally too easy, right? You can go the other way too with all of the sand traps that we're putting in hourglass patterns, etc. Maybe computerized lane machines weren't the best thing for the game of bowling. Maybe we control those. Maybe we go to scripted patterns only for competitive play. Maybe we go back to the days where we don't advertise patterns or publish them. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm pretty sure that having friends debate urethane or not against each other while they're bowling in competition with alcohol involved is probably not the right solution. Anyhow, good on you, USBC. At least you acknowledge there's a problem. Bad on you because you have no clue how to fix it. You let the cat out of the bag. Good luck getting it back in. Peace, folks. I'm out.